Welcome to Kernels of Truth, brought to you by Progress Kentucky. And that music comes from Nate. And frankly, that should be a top 10 by the end of the year. I'm going to make that happen if I can. Brought to you by Progress Kentucky. This week, we'll cover Kentucky's breaking political news, big win for the gays, big news about campaign contributions in the governor's race, and big news about broadband. Then we're excited to interview the Reverend Dr. Leah Schade, a Lexington-based theologian and pastor who has been educating the public about the growing threat of Christian nationalism. So we'll hear about this movement challenging the separation of church and state, things we've seen in Kentucky in the last month, and what folks committed to maintaining that wall should be doing. Then we'll close out with a critical call to action. But first, are you ready to help turn Kentucky purple? We know our state is deeply red, Kool-Aid red, with a GOP supermajority committed to moving us backwards on LGBTQ plus rights, on BIPOC visibility, on women's rights, weakening the ability of unions to collectively organize for better pay and better working conditions, and critically important elections coming to voters across our state in November. If you want a Commonwealth that works for all of us, join Progress Kentucky and support our campaign and turn our Commonwealth purple. Make a donation at our Secure Act Blue website and spread the word that we are tired of the GOP ignoring the needs of regular folks in Kentucky like me and you. And we think our Commonwealth is worth fighting for. So it is now time to check in with our co-hosts. Let us all know who and where you are, and what does your protest sign say today? Oh, and you there, right there on the internet, we mean you too. I want to read what your sign says. Put it in the chat while we're sharing ours. Mine says, forgive me, but give them hell. Aaron, what does your sign say?
Hey, Willie. So let's see. Thanks for opening the show. We appreciate that.
Love it.
Changing the roles up a little bit. We've got Annabelle and Nate out, so I have to produce, and I'm not nearly as good at it as Nate and Annabelle. So it's going to be a little clunkier, but I certainly couldn't host and produce. So I appreciate you stepping in. And let's see, my sign today, what am I protesting? Given what we're going to talk about later on, I think my sign would be the classic, Jesus, protect me from your followers. And I'm Aaron, and I'm coming to you from Childsburg, a lovely deed-restricted community in Lexington.
And Nema, what about your sign?
Hey guys, it's good to see you all tonight, and I thank God I'm not hosting. My sign tonight obviously is going to be very newsworthy, and it is the Constitution is not a buffet. And when I say that, I mean, I think I tweeted this a little earlier. It seems to me like there's a lot of electeds in Frankfurt who just pick and choose whatever they think they can from the Constitution. See a lot of support for 2A all the time, but as we saw, the 14th Amendment also has meaning, and we will talk about that with the SB 150 stuff that just hit, I believe, today, Willie. But that is my sign.
Yeah, that First Amendment also matters. How can we somehow make guns free speech so that they care about it? That's if we can do that, we're right. In it to win it.
Absolutely.
Aaron, any ideas for how to make guns free speech?
I really don't, but I think constitutional scholars do need to work on that. We need to figure that out. Oh, Jesus. We clearly have some work to do on that front, but courts have been useful recently. But then you look at the Supreme Court, you're like, well, clearly that's not the backstop that it maybe once was. So
this feels like I'm gonna stab your mom, but then make breakfast for you every day. Like maybe you'll forget that I stabbed your mom, and I'm like, I'm not gonna forget that, Supreme Court. Thank you very much. But yeah, there have been some good cases lately.
Absolutely.
All right.
So first story. Yay for the gays. We won temporarily due to an injunction. So the first story of the night, y'all might know that LGBTQ youth rights are my jam. They are my reason for getting up. They're the reason I throw rocks every single day. And so here is some great news on that front. Federal Judge David Hale, just like an hour and a half ago, said that he sided with the ACLU of Kentucky, which means that he is going to temporarily block part of Senate Bill 150. And you might remember that Senate Bill 150 bans gender-affirming health care for some transgender minors. And what I love are how promising and hopeful his words are. He had this to say, and I'll cite him directly. Based on the evidence submitted, the court finds that the treatments barred by Senate Bill 150 are medically appropriate and necessary for some transgender children under the evidence-based standard of care accepted by all major medical organizations in the United States. And when he says all major medical, here are the organizations that believe we should be giving care to these children. American Medical Association, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American Counseling Association, the American Public Health Association, the American Psychological Association. We can argue about some nuance about how and when to give that treatment, but all of them say that it is medically necessary and can be life or death. Judge Hale had this to say. These drugs have a long history of safe use in minors for various conditions. It is undisputed that puberty blockers and hormones are not given to pubescent children with gender dysphoria. So what this basically means is, one, the judge is acknowledging that the biggest tactic, and the tactics that you all are probably seeing in ads right now, Andy Beshear wants to those aren't really happening. We don't actually give these drugs to children who haven't hit puberty. It does mean that these drugs, in rare cases, are given to some trans youth who are post-pubescent as life-saving mechanism. And Judge Hale finds that the likelihood that they're going to win this case is so great that he's gone ahead and given the injunction so that these kids can get access to life-saving measures. Anybody want to chime in and make some noise of happiness before we get to the second story?
I mean, I think it's great. I think it's long overdue. God bless these parents and their children for doing this lawsuit, because stepping out and stepping forward is not easy. And so I want to thank them on behalf of all Kentucky parents because, really they're putting themselves out there to not only protect their children, but also to protect anybody else's child. And, that is a huge, huge thing. And the other thing that I want to say is that it's funny to me, Willie and Aaron, that parent rights only extend to certain parents. And I had just seen on the old tweet box right before I came on that, people are like, thank you for protecting, thank you, Daniel Cameron, for protecting these kids from their parents who want to do them harm. I mean, I called this about 3 months ago, or during the whole stuff with when we were in session, that ultimately this is a certain group of people who think that you suck as a parent and that you're making crap decisions as a parent. And because of that, they need to step in. I mean, they're really calling parents, compassionate parents who just want to love their kids and help their kids. They're really calling them, shit parents.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's wrong. It's gross. And so hooray for these parents for taking the step to protect all kids who need this type of care.
Yeah. I think of what these parents are risking, or non-parents who are stepping up for other people, the sort of things that they have to say. And what's particularly frustrating is, it's that buffet question again, right? They claim that they're for parents' rights until 71% of Kentucky parents say that they want this right. But it doesn't matter that those parents' doctor say that they should have this right. It doesn't matter that science says they should have this right. It doesn't matter that decency and logic say that they should have this right. The pastors of the people who don't want them to have it, the 30% of Kentuckians, matter more than anyone else in this scenario. The will of the GOP matters more than the will of the parent or science or doctors. It's frustrating, not only because of the harm that it's doing, but it's frustrating because we see that the sort of appeals to logic are all pretense, right?
Well, it was super exciting to just, see that the judge wasn't, some conservative ideologue hack, right? You know, he was actually applying, oh, I'm going to read, these briefings and see that, oh yeah, it's clearly medically the preferred course of action to have these tools at the doctor's disposal, and that the political system interjecting to get in the way of those treatments, is a bad idea. I think a lot of this, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of people don't know a lot of trans people, right? So I think the Republicans have been able to use this issue because it's just scary and different, and their base is like, yeah, I don't like this. This is different, and I don't like different because I've been in charge forever, and this is just different, and I don't want to like upset the balance of power, right? So and I think we'll get at some of that later as well with our guest. But the idea that they've been able to kind of weaponize that fear and that discomfort, and so much, like most things political, so much misinformation. Right, as you were, talking about, Willie, like who's getting puberty blockers, who's getting hormone replacements. It's not like prepubescent kids, and the idea that there's gender reassignment surgery somewhere in the conversation. Like, well, no, if you're talking about minors, that's not part of the conversation, right? Yeah. But they've been so willing to like put that scary idea out there. And everyone is like so obsessed with what's in somebody's pants, right? Like that, and I think it's maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's to our disservice that we've been kind of like so clinical in our descriptions. We should just say, like, just so you know, like that is not on the table for minors. That's not going to be a thing. And people are like, oh, well, what are we talking about? Like they've been able to just use so much misinformation to scare people into the idea that things are happening that just aren't happening. Right. Because you think about it, like, oh, that does seem pretty significant that you're having gender reassignment surgery. And if a kid might change their mind or, like, yeah, that seems like you've gone pretty far. Like, I think most rational and reasonable folks, in fact, that's why all doctors, this is not part of what's actually the American Academy of Pediatrics is endorsing in terms of their treatments. Right. So there's just been a lot of like garbage talk about it that hasn't gotten, because people haven't been comfortable enough to ask real questions, and they haven't gotten the information. But this judge like cut through all that and like, nope, I'm looking at it and I'm writing about what the actual treatments are, and they seem medically necessary. And so yay, yay gays.
Yay gays. It's one more example that the pretense for something does not match the reality of something. For example, we still have not banned conversion therapy in Kentucky. It's banned in over 30 states. We know for a fact what happens with conversion therapy: a 92% increase in suicidal ideation, an 88% increase in attempts if it happens. And yet we've refused to ban it because we're afraid of upsetting people. So again, certain parents matter, others don't. Yet we're introducing this boogeyman. Florida has tried its best to find some example of surgery. 5 million students, they found two who had ever had any sort of surgery, and we're talking about 17-year-olds. Puberty blockers, it's 1 in 53,000 youth. So how many high schools you're going to have to go to in Kentucky to find a single student who's going to have a puberty blocker? And again, puberty blockers block puberty from continuing so that students don't have to try to have surgery, right? The whole goal is to slow down the progression of things so that you have time to let the child think. That's my soapbox. And that is news item number 1. Yay, yay, yay. Let's go to news item number 2. So this story focuses on Attorney General and gubernatorial hopeful Daniel "Nothing is Sacred Except My Attempt to Rise to Power" Cameron, who not only looks like he could be Ken's arch nemesis from the Barbie franchise, but who is now actively acting like one. And this story is about campaign contributions. And ever since Citizens United, I feel like we have these all the time. So this starts with a bit of irony. Just a few months ago, Daniel Cameron raked a judge over the coals because there was a lawyer who was presenting a case before the judge who had donated $250 to a campaign. And so the judge recused himself from this particular case, and ultimately had some other issues because he liked an Andy Beshear post, but $250. All right. So the story comes out. Daniel Cameron actually didn't just take a large political contribution. His office has been actively investigating something called Edgewater Recovery since 2022. And the Office of Medicare Fraud and Abuse, which operates under Cameron, has been doing the bulk of this work. After they started investigating this company, Cameron actually calls and asks them to make a political donation. So picture it, the police come to your house or arresting you and say, hey, would you like to donate some money? Right. And to the tune of $6,900, he gets multiple donors from Edgewater, the owner of Edgewater, the general counsel of Edgewater, multiple directors at Edgewater. And what's interesting is this is the first time they have made this donation. So it's not as if we're looking at something that sort of always happened. This was a first. What I thought was particularly damning about this entire case outside of the timeline is what the lawyer for Edgewater had to say. These were his exact words when he was asked about this contribution. He says, I think Edgewater thought it was probably very prudent to make sure that they preserve their ability to work with whomever was successful in November to help further Edgewater's goals. When I read this, I actually had to reread it 5 times to think, am I reading what I think I'm reading? So we're not even pretending that businesses aren't buying politicians anymore. That's what these words say. We thought it was prudent so that we could continue to work with whoever was successful, i.e., if we don't do this, then we won't be able to work with you, i.e., working with a political figure in the United States means giving them money so that they will work with you. But the bulk of this story sort of happens in terms of a timeline. So there was a records request about excessive campaign contributions on May the 17th. It is not until 2 days later that Daniel Cameron recuses himself from this particular case and then returns the money. And then it takes a week for his office to actually give information to the people who were making this open records request, which means we don't see any evidence that he had any intention of actually giving back this money or actually even pointing this out until someone forced him to. And then it took a week for him to sort of communicate that. The last little bit of this that's super ironic is how Andy Beshear handles this so very differently. Beshear's office would never do anything so crass as to call someone they're investigating and ask them to give money. But he did get $200,000 in contributions from diverse people, but it was from one credit card. And immediately gave back the money and refused to take it. So yeah, it's gross how money works in politics. And when we think about these kids, it also makes me think, what kind of money is shifting hands at what level? Who has a vested financial interest in this?
Yeah, I completely agree, Willie. It's gross. It's disturbing. And it happens across. I mean, to me, it's almost like it's a pay to play kind of situation. And I think what bothers me the most is that, we have a very low percentage of trans kids in the state, right? And who is throwing in the cash to keep them protected? Because apparently that's what you have to have, right? Yes. Like you were saying. So this is why we don't see a lot of people. A lot of anything happening as far as, let's talk about Eastern Kentucky for a second. They don't have a lot of political clout anymore, influence, and only a few people have a ton of money, right? That they can do these things for. So this is why, in my opinion, there's not a whole lot being done for Eastern Kentucky at any time. There was just an ARC report that came out that was absolutely terrible. We're not getting better in the 606. We're getting worse. And what we're doing is we're arguing about trans kids.
Yeah.
And, for me, it's almost criminal. But the system is set up to do exactly what it's doing. And it's been created to lock out regular folks, to lock us out from the process, to lock us out from having a voice, to lock us out from having anything, you have to have cash. Hell, we had a woman that spent, I don't know how much, millions of dollars trying to get the governor's seat. It wasn't for her. Let's be honest. Kelly Craft wanted it because Joe Craft probably wants to open some, weirdo something coal mines. It's going to, give us all black lung within 6 months. But it doesn't matter as long as they're getting paid. And hell, they live in Oklahoma anyway. So that is kind of what we're doing here. It's all about the money. This is why good people can't run for office, good regular people.
Yeah.
And the whole system is set up for the rich.
And if you're out there watching, I want you think about who they've been attacking for the last couple of years. Teachers and students. Who has absolutely no money to fight for themselves? Children. That's why they're such an easy target. And teachers, we all know what teachers are. Teachers are people who dedicate their entire life to children and forfeit any, reality in which they're ever going to be super rich because they don't want the money more than they want to help, right? These are perfect targets, and they're people who are never going to be able to fight back financially. And that's why they're the easiest target. And so whoever you are and whatever it is you want, whatever it is you think Kentucky should be, if there's anybody with $1 more than you who wants it to be something else, they've already won. Right. And this is not me trying to be partisan. It is the reality of the economic situation in this country, which came about because Republicans wanted this and the Supreme Court, which was conservative, decided it, that money was free speech. We can't have the equal ability to speak if you have more money.
Absolutely.
I think the money is speech argument, and that goes back to, Buckley Vallejo, right? So, there, even before Citizens United, there were bad precedents in terms of money equaling speech, right? And Citizens United was like corporations are people, so they should have the same ability to speak, which, clearly they've got this outsized influence because their megaphone's just so massive. And it is, as Nema said, it's gross. The campaign finance system is fully broken, and it is legalized bribery, and pay to play is, that's just the rules. And it's terribly unfortunate. I think, I personally experienced, I do some policy work, and I've done it for environmental groups in Kentucky, and I've done it for other perspectives in other states. And, if you aren't part of the game, if you aren't making, if you aren't hiring lobbyists, if you aren't making political contributions, your ability to truly influence policy at the state level is just negligible. Right? You have to do an amazing amount of work to get, kind of amplified voices and get people engaged and get people to the state capitol to pay attention. And even then, it's if we think about it, we've seen examples from time to time where that does work, right? Massive outpourings of outrage and public engagement and attention. Nema, obviously, you wouldn't be in this kind of arena, but for some of those efforts, we saw with SB 150, similar massive outpouring. But sometimes you win and sometimes you don't. It's very much like a crapshoot, even when you have huge outpouring of public engagement, which doesn't happen because who the hell's got time and energy to watchdog our system that closely and go and spend their free time? Who the hell's got free time, to go hold these guys accountable, right? So it's just a broken system, and it's this story exposed it very much so. The fact that Dan Cameron is shaking down companies that his office is investigating is just wrong. But also, if somebody doesn't know how to bundle, right? Campaign bundling is a thing, right? So we know that if you want to have more influence, you should get a bunch of your rich friends to also make the maximum contribution about the same time. And when you hand over that contribution to the candidate, make sure you see it's all together. We're here. We want to have your attention when we call next time, And so the fact that bundling happens is gross. It's just part of the system. But the fact that this Republican governor of London doesn't even know how to do it, right? No, you can't put them all on the same credit card, you stupid idiot. You got to get them to make their own contributions. And then that you better not, have a paper trail that shows you've paid them back. But this guy just doesn't know how to do it. Maybe it's because he's a Republican and he just wanted to get Andy in trouble. I do not know. I do not know the backstory of that story.
Was it a Republican who was making the donations?
Yes.
I didn't even know that part of the story.
Yes.
The Republican mayor.
So what I said, the first thing I said was, hell, who's got $200,000 credit limit on a credit card? Like,
Yeah. Well,
I've never seen that.
You can buy a
and
house
why
on
a
your
credit card anyway?
Right?
Clearly, this is something you plan on paying back immediately because you plan on having the money back in your pocket immediately.
I wonder if it was like in college, whenever you would like your friend would have a credit card that you all drank on, and then like then you took a little bit, like you were like, oh yeah, yeah, it's like a money maker for him. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, this is the craziest story ever.
I'm probably going to get myself in trouble with the feds, but when I was in college, I learned if you make a deposit into your bank account on a Friday afternoon when it's closed for the weekend, it would be as if you had real money in the bank. Then you could withdraw money. So I would deposit $30, withdraw 20, spend the 20, wait for my check on Sunday, then deposit the check. And when the check went through, it would all work out in the balance. But somehow I got access to money that I didn't have. I don't know if it was legal.
Let's talk about check kiting on our next episode. We're
right
on
how to
talk about all sorts of shady financial transactions.
Right? I'm like, gosh, I don't know. Yeah,
when I was a high school student at McDonald's, we found a way to trick the system to make our average times go down because they track that stuff. And the owners of our building and some I don't know, McFeds showed up and they went into an office with me and closed the door and they said, if you tell us what you've been doing, you won't get in trouble. And I was like, what? And they were like, honestly, we want to learn how you're doing this because do you know that it takes 17 seconds on average from someone ordering a meal from you to someone leaving the store? That doesn't happen in a drive-through unless they're driving 22 miles an hour. But they did all this numbers. They were like, "How are you doing it?"
You were cheating very effectively, but maybe a little too effectively.
Because we didn't see the averages. We would just be like,
right.
we would bring up ketchup packets because they were free,
Yeah.
and then send them through the drive-through and then clear them back out.
So I'm thinking, with all this discussion about having to have money and all this other stuff, just a side note. Because one of the things I've been watching has been, what is her name? Gladys, the white Gladys, who is this orca whale who has been tipping over yachts and all this other stuff. And now she's organized and there's like 16 of them that run in this pack. And so I think I'm team orca. The older I get, the more team orca I am. And I think we should all just become ungovernable and just just be like, ha, 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 we're taking out your ship. Yeah.
All right. We've gotten far afield, I think.
Yes.
We have one more story we want to cover. I've got it queued up. So this is about the kind of massive influx of federal resources that everyone from Mitch McConnell to Andy Beshear agrees is a great thing. Joe Biden, thank you, Uncle Joe, for bringing the dollars. We're going to get over $1 billion for broadband in Kentucky, which we all know broadband in Kentucky needs help. And that's been a long-term process, right? So obviously there's a state broadband office that has been kind of struggling to get a state investment ready to go and making sure that process is in fact functioning. But it's, it hasn't been absolutely smooth sailing, is for sure. The Office of Broadband Deployment has, had some setbacks for sure. The Affordable Connectivity Program, I think, is a federal program, though, that will be kind of in addition to the Kentucky Wired program. So those two things will be working kind of in conjunction, building out the infrastructure, having the affordable connections for people who need it, which, everyone needs the internet, obviously. Like it's gone beyond like a thing that is nice to have. And it is now absolutely critical for all parts of our society and commerce. So what we are learning, though, is that Charles Booker's Office of Faith-Based Initiatives, or Office of Faith-Based and Community Initiatives, is going to play a role in helping connect communities to those resources and to those programs, which I think is a really good thing, having that kind of navigator role, folks in the community understanding kind of what the challenges are and sitting with people to get them, kind of to walk through the application process and joining the different programs. Because again, a lot of times these federal programs are available, but they're just not taken advantage of by all the folks who are, who qualify for them. So I think it's really important that we've got that piece of it as well. But this is just one of many visits. So we had, I think yesterday, the Commerce Secretary was in at Simmons College in Louisville talking about this major investment. I'm pretty sure tomorrow we're going to have Secretary Mayor Pete in Lexington talking about some other major federal infrastructure investments that are happening. And, I guess I just want to take a second to recognize that these hundreds of millions and billions of dollars that are coming to projects in Kentucky would not have happened, under the Donald Trump presidency, right? The guy who made such a big deal about infrastructure. He had Infrastructure Week on a monthly basis and never got anything done. But Joe Biden got it done, and he had to work with Mitch McConnell to make it happen. And I'm sorry for Joe Biden, but he did that, and he was willing to kind of take one for the team. Stood there by the Brent Spence Bridge to celebrate the fact that this is happening right now. We didn't get a visit, but there are a number of the Secretary of Energy and others are they're going through the battery belt and these places in the southeast that are going to be doing massive EV manufacturing. They should have made a stop in Louisville. I guess Louisville got the Commerce Secretary instead. But the fact that this massive influx of real jobs is happening because of these investments in clean energy and clean transportation. The Ford twin battery plants. I've said it before. I don't know if you've seen it outside of Louisville. It is enormous. It is the biggest thing I've ever seen in my life. And that's going to be thousands and thousands of jobs building the kind of the cars of the future, the batteries that will power the cars of the future. We are going to have twice as many people in the battery manufacturing industry in Kentucky as we will have in the coal mining industry by the time those factories are up and going. But I do know this, that the coal industry is not going away, and they're not going to give up their political power. That clean energy tech doesn't have anywhere close to the political capital in Kentucky. Obviously, if you see what's happening, these guys are not going out of their way to encourage people to drive a battery Ford, right? They're in fact going to put roadblocks in the way of EV deployment, which is unfortunate. But it goes back to that story, who's paying to play, and the clean energy tax folks don't have the money that the traditional coal interests do. But what we are seeing is real investments in our Commonwealth. It's going to mean real jobs, and it's going to mean that our bridges aren't going to fall apart like they were doing in Philadelphia, right? So clearly, our nation's infrastructure is desperately in need of this influx. And it's really exciting that, it's happening right now, but let's not forget why it's happening, right? And let's not just be thankful that we've got more broadband and that we're going to have more, intact bridges and more bike lanes and more EV charging stations that happen because of decisions that politicians made, and they should get the credit for it, I think. So that's my take on that story.
I love it. And what it emphasizes to me and what is so important here is that we all remember, I don't think the GOP really stands for anything. It just opposes things. There's no reason to be opposing clean energy, bringing jobs to Kentuckians, right? But of course they're going to oppose it. There's no reason to be opposing so many of the things that they oppose. And if you look at Andy Beshear's record for the last 3 years, he has done phenomenal things for the state. I feel like I can't turn on Facebook without one of my friends standing in front of a giant Andy Beshear check, because some companies coming to do X, Y, or Z, or some federal money's building a hospital. The truth is, if you live in Kentucky and you want your neighborhood to be better, if you want not to spill coffee on yourself because the roads are being paved over with gravel evidently around here, then voting Democrats is the only way that you're going to do that.
He nailed it. Yeah, I'm good at it.
All right. Well, I mean, that's the truth, right? They're delivering. Andy Beshear, got the federal dollars. He's deploying them in a smart way, and there's a lot of folks standing by big checks, but not just. Yeah. But also, he's landed these huge investments and these big corporate investments. That's not federal dollars. That is the private dollars. They've been competitive in helping, to kind of make sure these deals, because they do have to compete, right? Other states are trying to get these factories as well, right? So they're making sure they've got the prepared area for them to locate in, and that the resources are going to be there to connect them to water and fire and whatever. But I think he's done an amazing job of landing big investments, and that's going to be real jobs. And let's just give him the credit that he deserves for sure.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking, didn't Tennessee just reject money?
I think
and
it was Alabama.
Was it out? And then so the federal government then said, well, we'll give it to these people. They'll spend it in your state and do the job. So it's like, are we going to have to start circumventing, our own government just to get funds from the federal government? Because these states are like, oh, we don't want that money, so it's just so weird to me. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, no, for sure. We do need to move on, though. Our next element of the show.
Yay! I'm so excited for this interview. The universe has been throwing Lutherans at me for like the last month. I did a reading in Indianapolis. It was like the day before the Good Morning America thing. And there were a lot more people than I thought. And then one guy introduced himself and said he was a pastor. And I kind of froze. And then he was like, I'm Lutheran. And then I kind of unfroze. So we have tonight the Reverend Dr. Leah Schade, who is an associate professor of preaching. How cool is that? If there were a Hogwarts in Appalachia, we would definitely have a professorship of preaching. But I just love that. Sounds beautiful. Preaching and worship at Lexington Theological Seminary in Lexington, Kentucky. An ordained Lutheran minister for more than 20 years. She has written 6 books. And her Eco Preacher blog for Patheos explores the intersection of religion, environment, politics, and pop culture. She's also co-founder of the Clergy Emergency League, a network of 2,500 pastors throughout the U.S. who provide support and resources for clergy to prophetically minister in their congregations and the public square and resist white Christian nationalism. Everyone, welcome. We're so excited. Dr. Leah, Reverend Leah. So I have the first question for you. And it's really about definition. I think anytime we as Americans try to have any conversation, we fail at it because I'm using the word to mean one thing, someone else is completely thinking something else, and we never really know what each other is talking about. So your work has been in illuminating what this threat is. So how would you describe it, and is it getting worse?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the first 40 minutes of the show. It has been so enlightening, and I'm just thrilled to hear about the bill targeting transgender children and families being pushed back. That fills me with such hope. So, Christian nationalism is a fusion of extremist fundamentalist Christianity and nationalism, and what some people would say is actually a form of fascism. So another word for it is Christofascism. And what we're seeing is that, yes, this has always been part of the American scene. Those who seek power have always tried to use religion in some form to justify their authoritarian rule. In the United States right now, what we're seeing is that this is no longer a fringe thing. This is something that is front and center. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. They are out in front, and their agenda is absolutely to take over this country with a radical right-wing Christian agenda to impose a patriarchal system, a hierarchy that targets anybody who is not white, straight, cis, not Christian, not male. Anybody that does not fit that category is considered to be, lower on the food chain, and therefore either subservient or should be targeted, gotten rid of, killed. They're very violent in their language. They're violent in their actions, and they are. I mean, this is not just a movie plot. They are actually seeking world domination. I don't know if any of you have seen any of the series Shiny Happy People on Amazon, but it is enlightening exactly what their agenda is. It's a documentary about how white Christian nationalism has been growing in this country through the homeschool movement and what they call the quiverful movement, like having lots and lots of white Christian children to push back against, the Muslims and the Jews and the blacks and the gays and all of that. And I actually have a family member who is part of that. And for decades, we thought, well, this is just some sort of like fringe thing. No, actually, it's not. This is their agenda. It's very much in line with what some parallels of what we saw in Nazi Germany and the way Hitler used religion to further his aims and to get the population on his side. So, yes, it's something that we need to be aware of and to recognize that, according to the Public Religion Research Institute, 30% of Americans are either white Christian, like they're either on board with it just in terms of ideology, or they are violent actors in it. And that filters down through our communities, and even progressive churches, even mainline progressive churches have white Christian nationalist leaning folks in congregations. So it's something we need to be aware of and push back against in a much more bold way than we have.
Yeah, and I think what I really like is how you're talking about how even if this is just 30%, it's affecting the way the rest of us, the lenses that we're using to see the world. I think about the South Carolina governor McMaster saying just last week that he wants Democrats to be so rare that we hunt them like dogs, when the majority of the Democratic electorate in that state is black. You would not be able to say that 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Absolutely. It's normalizing this kind of violent language, and I mean they're really taking pages out of the playbook from the fascist regime in Nazi Germany, where the more you use this kind of rhetoric and you normalize it for people, they're getting used to it, and it also stokes the emotions of those who um, become actors in this, and it's something called stochastic terrorism, where the leader doesn't even have to actually do it. All they have to do is inspire other people, the underlings, the minions, to go out and do these things, and that's what terrorizes a population, and it has a chilling effect on democracy. So yes, you're right, this is on the rise, and we need to be much stronger and more courageous. And when I say we, I mean those of us in the Christian church who claim this faith. We need to be out in front and calling it out for what it is, and saying this is not what Christianity is about. It's actually the exact opposite, and we need to denounce that at every turn.
Leah, thank you so much for joining us this week. This is really kind of eye-opening. I'd heard, Marjorie Taylor Greene saying very clearly, I think her quote is, "I'm a Christian and I say it proudly, and we should be Christian nationalists." Just put it out there, plain as day. Yep. The fact that Public Religion Research Institute and Brookings poll or survey found that over half of Republicans believe the country should be a strictly Christian nation, either adhering to Christian nationalism or sympathizing with those views. You add that together, over half of Republicans think that's where we should go. That's the Holy Land. I was driving on Richmond Road here in Lexington the other day. Somebody had this huge flag on their SUV, and it was an American flag with a cross on it.
Yes.
This stuff is not hiding. If you think back, we had the Ku Klux Klan had been distributing flyers a few weeks ago in different neighborhoods in central Kentucky. We had a Klan membership badge flashed at an LGBTQ pride rally in Corbin, Kentucky. Are there other things that you've seen in Kentucky that you can point to that says, yeah, it's happening, it's on the rise, there's more of it out there, and we need to be concerned?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kentucky has been a hotbed for the Ku Klux Klan almost from the very beginning, and we're seeing more of that. One thing I want your listeners to keep in mind is that when we see these kinds of overt actions, and also the violent demonstrations by the Proud Boys and those other organizations, remember that part of their goal here is recruitment. So, and they're actually competing against each other, right? There's not just one monolithic Christian nationalist movement. There's a lot of little cells of this, and they're competing for members. So when they're putting their flyers out there, when they're doing demonstrations on television, when they're taking violent actions, they are trying to attract a certain percentage of the population that is susceptible to this sort of thing. And so it's not by accident that they're doing this. It's very intentional that they are trying to do this kind of work so that they can get more members for themselves. So, when you think about what are the things, like, why is this so attractive for people? It gives them a sense of purpose and a sense of belonging. um, there is this fear of loss of white social status. There is a weaponizing of resentment and this desire for power. So when you feel like you don't have power, even if you can put yourself in proximity to that power, that feels good to you. There's also a fear of the loss of patriarchal authority, and that has a lot to do with these bills that we're seeing that target, the anti-abortion, anti-trans, anything that would empower um, people to push back on an patriarchal authoritarian agenda. They want they want to do away with that. They don't want public education. They don't want critical thinkers. They want people brainwashed so that they are malleable and submissive and will do their bidding. The other thing just to remember is that the the right-wing fringe of Christianity has always been attracted to conspiracy theories, which has to do with, well, when is Jesus coming back? When is the apocalypse? And they do all of these secret codes in the Bible and try to figure out when this is. And so when you have something like QAnon comes along in a secular way and kind of fuses itself onto that, man, it's like putting it on steroids. So they are, and there's also an attraction to narcissistic leaders. You see this a lot in these fundamentalist churches, these strong leaders who can do whatever they want with people, with their power, and there's absolutely no consequences for them. And so when a leader like Trump comes along and does the kinds of things that horrify the rest of us, this doesn't horrify people who are in this religious movement because they see this thing all the time. It feels very familiar to them.
Yikes.
Yeah, this is disturbing. So I'm not going to sleep tonight now, Reverend Doctor. I'll tell you that.
I got to tell you the truth.
And I appreciate that. So I'm going to go, since we kind of talked about what my question was going to be, I'm curious because as you were talking, I could kind of see this, like Aaron was saying, in Kentucky already. And as I was watching the General Assembly this year, I couldn't help but think about after I watched Shiny Happy People, I think they're already in our government. Yes. I think that they are elevating their voices and gaining power amongst their caucus. What do you think? What have you seen as far as that goes?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the reasons that they seek a supermajority. It's also why their strategy has been to go to the local level. I have to admit, they have been brilliant in their strategy. They've been flying under the radar for decades. Decades they've been doing this work. They've been teaching their young people how to infiltrate school boards and townships and local governments and then eventually the state houses and then Senate races and House of Representatives. And so absolutely they've been there, and all of a sudden we turn around and like, how did that happen? Because they've been working on this for decades. And now here we are behind the 8 ball and realizing, yikes, they are literally trying to take it over. And when they talked about this, we kind of laughed them off and said, oh, this is just kind of crazy stuff. It's not crazy because they're doing it. And so now we have to play catch up, and we have to mobilize in terms of voting, education, getting out young people who often can see through this if they have any critical thinking skills whatsoever. They know for a fact that this this targeting of their trans friends. This is ridiculous. They want nothing to do with this unless they were in the homeschool movement, right? And had this bubble put around them and they've been taught to think a certain way. That whole group, which they again want to send into our government, that group believes this. But anybody outside of this says this is ridiculous. But we don't often engage them in the public square. We just let them get away with this. And now we've really got to push back, and we have to do it courageously, and we have to do this together, arms locked, ready to rock and roll.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much. You've like I said, you scared the bejesus out of me, but you know, it's you got to hear it. You know, it's happening.
Yeah, and this is one of the ways in which clergy can reach out to each other, even not just across denominational lines, but also in a multi-faith and interfaith way. So as a Lutheran pastor, I have more in common with my Muslim, Jewish, Sikh, Hindu fellows who see that these are not our values. You know, and in this country, one religion doesn't get to dictate what happens for everybody else. You know, if you don't, you know, for example, with the abortion issue, and they'll often use biblical verses to justify this, but there are so many different ways to interpret scripture. So if this is your decision that, you know, you don't want to have an abortion because you believe the Bible tells you this, that's fine. Then don't have an abortion. But if my reading of scripture tells me something different, that actually I have autonomy over my body and I can make a decision like this, then you don't get to make that decision for me. And so putting women in a second class position, putting anybody who's not Christian, anybody who's who is considered weak, any of that is something that we have got to come together as a community and say, this is not who we are. This is not democracy. These are not our values. And we've got to try to push back the tide here and say, not here, not on our watch.
I particularly like how you sort of frame this as you have more in common with some non-Christian religions than you have with these groups. And what it actually makes me think of how women will often fight side by side so ferociously with LGBTQ people, but oftentimes straight men are really slow to speak up. You know, in private they'll say, you know, I'm all for, but then they'll sit in a room where people are, and I think, you know, if you're looking at it in terms of privilege, right?
Yeah.
They have the privilege and they get something out of other people putting us down. They get more privilege and authority. What I think is beautiful about you specifically being a voice here is that you do share privilege, right? You're to some extent, you're a reverend in a Christian church, and that gives you some authority. And so saying specifically, this is not us, you're saying we will not allow this army to do work that gives us more power. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely, Willie. And, you know, one of the things that we're trying to encourage our pastors to think about in the Clergy Emergency League, which I helped to co-found after Trump invaded the Episcopal Church, St. John's Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C., and held the Bible upside down and all, like that's what spurred me to start this movement, is to give support to pastors who are in red states, red neighborhoods, who are often isolated, who get pushback from their congregants who say, well, we can't talk about things because that's political. But, you know, if the pastor would start standing up and saying things that actually agreed with their agenda, well, they'd be fine with that, even if it was political. So I think, Nema, you were talking about this earlier, or maybe it was Willie. I can't remember it. But, you know, you were saying, like, it is good for me, but not for thee, right? It's cherry picking. It is all about my rights, but none of my responsibility, and no rights for you. And here's the problem. They use religion to justify this, you know, God made man the head of the household. And you just keep drilling that into people, and all the authority is resting in this particular person. I mean, it's an old story. It goes back to the Fuhrer. It goes back to the Caesar in Rome. It goes back to Pharaoh in Egypt. like this is not a new story. This is not our first rodeo, and we can actually learn from Scripture how to fight back, how to resist, how to be non-compliant with empire.
Like Nema and the whales. Yeah, that's
right.
awesome.
I did not hear that story about Gladys the white orca. I am going to look that up because environmental issues are also my thing. I'm so excited to hear that story. I love the idea of, Earth has agency, and so do our neighbors in creation. And so to see that pushback from nature itself against the elite, I'm all for it.
See, I told you guys, it was not off topic.
It's totally on topic.
I love that her name is Gladys too. Like it could have been Kaylee, but no, it's Gladys. Gladys is a woman who's seen some stuff.
She's smoking. She got like a cigarette dangling.
You're not named Gladys unless you put up with men's crap. That's just the truth. Well or human. What I'm thinking about from this is we always study these fascist movements as here's a thing that went wrong in history. When it appears and I'm listening, it's really a psychological aspect of humanity, right?
Yes.
Well, I had noticed before there are people who appear not to want to reason morally, so they just sort of give that to someone else. And that's dangerous because they can do horrific things if they give that to a power. And when you were making this point about how they love these authoritative men, it's almost like they take part of their ego too. Like, I won't be me, I'll be Trump. He's my NASCAR guy.
Yes.
And I had not thought of it that way.
Yeah, it's a projection. Like what I can't get for myself, I can see in this distortion of what manhood or leadership is. And I can live vicariously through that. And when I am associated with this movement, when I am fighting for him, I'm really fighting for myself and my ability to do all the things like, incest with my family members and controlling, the children and beating my wife and like all of these things. Like this justifies what I want to do. It's psychologically, it's like the id, or it's the id taking over here. But it's also recognizing that when you put a theological lens on this and say that it is God who ordains this, it carries so much weight and for some people. And that's very hard to push back, especially from those of us who preach a God of love and forgiveness and grace and mercy. That's considered weak. And so you never hear Christian nationalists talking about the teachings of Jesus that have to do with caring for the least of these, the vulnerable. You don't hear that. They want to talk about, the God of, the warrior God who's going to fight for them on their behalf. So we've got two competing narrative, two stories that are going on here. And this is why preachers really need to get support from each other to push back on this. And also because we're seeing more attacks on houses of worship and clergy themselves who are being doxxed and trolled and physically attacked, or their congregations attacked.
Wow.
Well, thank you so much, Leah. Really appreciate your time. And if folks didn't know, Leah's been on the show before. It's been a minute. I think it might have even been when we were the Moscow Mitch Monday, I think, potentially.
Right. Yeah.
So, but yeah, thanks so much for coming back on and sharing your views and sharing that information. And we'll share links to the Clergy Emergency League in the show notes, so people can find out about that there, and then also to your Eco Preacher blog as well, so people can find some of your blog posts. But yeah, thanks so much for alerting us to this presence of this threat that's growing and what we can do to push back on it.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Willie. Thanks, Nema.
Yeah, it was nice.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you, Reverend Doctor, for your call to action. And y'all, here is my call to action. We need you. Do you remember just 10 years ago when people weren't at each other's throats like they are now? Do you remember just a few years ago when Baptists could still be Baptists and do whatever they want to do, and Pentecostals could do whatever they want to do, but other people were free as well? We can have that again, but it's going to take us working together. We need you to help ensure 4 more years of compassionate commonwealth, of the dignity of Andy Beshear. Give us your views and work with us. And we mean this literally. Reach out, say hi, ask how you can help, ask how we can help, and expand your support for Andy and our great slate of statewide candidates. You can fill out our survey, which you can see now and is also on our site.
Nice. Yeah, take the survey. Willie, have you taken the survey yet?
I don't know.
He's not taking it, Aaron, and I haven't either.
Aaron, I have 45 emails marked "do this" in a folder called "do this."
All right. Well, it's pretty quick, so take the survey. All right. Thanks. Thanks, Willie, for hosting tonight. Thank you, Nema, for co-hosting. Always appreciate your hilarious perspective, informative, engaging, challenging. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Leah Schade, for your amazing information, important information. So as I close this out, Progress Kentucky is a nonprofit organization registered with the Kentucky Secretary of State. We are organized as a 501c4 and affiliated with the Indivisible Project, the Commonwealth Alliance Voter Engagement, or CAVE, and are also proud members of the Forward Kentucky Network. Progress Kentucky's goal is to educate, organize, increase voter turnout, and advance a progressive agenda through civic engagement. Make sure to join us next week when we will have a guest, I'm pretty sure. Production of episode 119 was kind of by me. Thank you, Nate, for the theme songs. You can find more information and music at natosongs.com. If you miss our weekly live stream on Facebook, don't worry. You can rewatch shows on Facebook, and you can also find our source links. You can also watch us on YouTube. You can also listen to our audio podcasts. Those are available on Apple, Google, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. If you do listen to the podcast, which is a pretty popular way of getting this information, please give us a review. Give us the stars, hopefully all 5 of them, and then write a review for the show. That helps make sure that the AI algorithm shares our show with more folks who care about progressive politics in Kentucky. So we very much appreciate that. We got to build a bigger megaphone. We're not going to be buying politicians anytime soon. So we got to do our organizing the old-fashioned way, sharing the information one-to-one. All right,
fill out that link for it to happen, and I just filled it out there, and it was that fast, people.
So easy. We made it so easy. Our logo and some graphic content provided by Couchfire Media. More information can be found at couchfiremedia.com. And that is it. That's the show. Thank you so much for sticking with us this fine week. Have a great week, folks. I don't know why.
Is it over?
I don't know. I can't figure out how to make the music play.
Can you cut it?
Oh, I think maybe I just need to. Here we go. Hold on. I think I got it.
Awkward.